Hi, good evening once again, everyone. Caribbean history, one of the very first subjects offered by CXC in 1979. This subject continues to present tremendous challenges to candidates each year. If we look at a couple of years on the grades that students receive in 2007, 68% of the candidates obtained grades 1 to 3. In 2010, that number was 65%, and in 2015, 63% of the candidates achieved grades 1 to 3, which are the acceptable grades at CSEC. Consistently, the examining committee for Caribbean history makes particular observations every year, and one of those observations is that candidates demonstrate weakness in analysis and evaluation skills. So I hope that Dr. Pemberton can help us this evening to try and navigate that. Today's webinar is intended to assist you, teachers or students or parents, to better navigate the CSEC Caribbean History Examination. My name is Stephen Sam, Assistant Registrar of Public Information Customer Services with CXC, and I will be your moderator for this evening's session. So let me first of all welcome all of you to the webinar. As I said, the objective of the webinar is to provide candidates with helpful tips as they prepare for the examination, as well as to answer questions and offer clarifications that they may have. The webinar will be recorded and will be shared on CXC's social media sites, including Facebook, Twitter, and CXC.org. With us today to help you navigate the Caribbean history examination is a longtime educator and CXC resource person, Dr. Rita Pemberton. Good evening, Dr. Pemberton, and welcome.
Good evening. Thank you very much, and thank you for having me on this activity. I want to say, first of all, that to the students, there is really no reason why figures should be pointing downwards in terms of students achieving grades 1 to 3. For the most part, since I've been associated with the examination, it has been clear that the students have a great deal of information. What they have not been able to do is to use that information in a manner to earn marks. So what I want to suggest are a few things before we get into your questions and your queries. I want to suggest a few things. First of all, what we observe in the exam is that students waste time rewriting questions when that is not at all necessary. So you get your question and you move straight into answering what the question asks for. And then you pay close attention to the question, because we do have people who give a lot of information, correct information, but just correct, not to the question that has been specifically asked. So you need to pay attention to that. Because people don't read the questions carefully, they generally write off things off their heads that really does not earn any marks. And in an examination, you want to make sure you earn marks. You write a response within the chronology. That is to say, if you get a question that asks you about enslaved people, that question will be confined to the period up to 1834. But if you are talking about enslaved people in 1900, as we get happening all the time, then something is terribly wrong with your thought processes in aligning the information to the question that you ask. So you need to be able to have a proper understanding of the chronology. You need to use the right terminology in referencing to people. The people who you are dealing with after 1838 are freed Africans. They are not slaves, and immigrants are not slaves. So when you're talking about them, in the people in the 19th century, in the 1900s, you can't be referring to them as slaves. In 1900s, enslaved people occupy the first half of the 1800s up to that time. Fine. So I just want to leave that with you. Also, the other thing is to understand certain basic terms. You get questions that ask you about social, economic, political. And you get responses that put all of them together like a big callaloo. You need to be able to determine social being relationships among people and groups. economic, meaning things that earn money and generate revenue for a country, and politics, political, the people who run for office and administer the country. So the basic understanding of those three areas of study has been a problem for some students. So this is something that you need to look at. You're understanding terms, and in your revision, you need to go back through and make sure you can categorize what is social, what is economic, and events in the right places, that what happened prior to 1838, what happened after 1838, what happened in 1900, and if the CSEC syllabus goes up to 1985, so don't give me anything that is happening in 2014, 2015, and write it as though it occurred in the period of the question. So with that, I would like you to take the floor and start asking your questions. Any comments?
Okay, thank you very much for that introduction, Dr. Pemberton. For the folks who are with us, the floor is now open. You can use the chat box on the right side of your screen, the bottom right side of your screen. You can also use the microphone. And so what I would ask you is, when you are speaking, you can click the microphone icon, and when you are not speaking, you would mute the microphone icon. So if you have any questions or comments, we would entertain those now, whether you want to speak and put them in the question and answer chat, or if you want to use the mic. So I would open the floor now for you to do that. Anyone ready to go? I see Decima is online. Welcome, Decima.
I'm not hearing anything from Decima, is she?
I was just welcoming her in particular, but I don't know, Decima, do you have any questions or comments you want to make? I know you have been a teacher for a while. If there are no questions, Dr. Pemberton, I could probably start the ball rolling by just prepping a little bit. And Dr. Pemberton, one of the comments I saw in a previous report from the subject committee says that additionally, the latter themes in the syllabus pose significant difficulty for the candidates who demonstrated inadequate knowledge of the content tested. Can you speak about what are the related themes in the syllabus?
Yes.
Themes are
Section C, that has to do with social life, has to do with diversification into the non-agricultural industries, and to do with celebrations and festivals. And that section, Section C, is always very poorly done. In fact, we do get a lot of little love notes on the students about them not being able to complete the syllabus. And so that is part of the problem. And when this occurs, you know, when the candidates have find that they cannot answer questions from a section, what they do is one of two things. You answer two questions from another section, which earns you absolutely no marks, or you write a very kind of journalistic guesswork response to a question and you move it to modern day. So if, for example, you talk, the question wants you to discuss the relations between ethnic groups, you get some examples from 2014, 2015, the last newspaper you might have read, and you write that and throw it back as an explanation for the situation in the period which the question directs you to. So that has been, you know, a problem. But I don't know, the inability to handle Section C is really problematic. So sometimes you get very good responses from Section A and B, but Section C is what poses a challenge. so I think we might have to review the syllabus with that in mind. And also, some people complain that they don't have access to adequate literature to cover some of those later topics. So that if you're in a place where there are a lot of Indian festivals, for example, those students in some countries like Guyana and Trinidad will be very familiar with them. But in the other territories, if they don't have concrete literature, they might be at somewhat of a disadvantage. So that might explain that does explain why you have this weakness in section C. And from the teacher side, we do have the comment that they can't manage the syllabus, that they are not allocated enough teaching time. In some schools, they're only given 2 or 3 periods a week, and in other schools, they have more time. In some schools, the library resources are slimmer than in other schools. That constitutes another problem. And then you do have the issue of changing of teachers, new teachers within a year. Some people, you have temporary staff and they change, and the new person is not very familiar with handling the syllabus. And so they're not able to complete, and so the students cannot deal with the questions that are posed to them in a manner that would earn them many marks. So, are there any other comments that you observe that you would want me to address? Hello? Oh, we've gone there. Hello? 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 Hello?
Hi, Dr. Pemberton, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm here. You know.
Okay. All right. So there's a question here from Jessica Fernandez.
Yes.
She asked, has there been any thoughts given to revise the Caribbean history syllabus, as it is too general and needs to be more specific with topics and subtopics?
Well, there is a procedure for revision. I mean, the syllabus is revised every 5 years. And so, yes, and a lot depends on what the committee recommends to CXC, but there is a process for revision, and comments are taken after every examination with respect to... Hello, are you hearing? No?
Yes, we are hearing you, Dr. Pemberton. Yes, we are.
Okay. All right. So I was saying that there is a process, in addition to the standard CXC process, there's a process where comments are made with respect to students' responses to particular questions, with respect to teacher comments on the paper generally, and the areas, the spread of the areas on the paper. So these are all put in the report, the examination report to CXC, so that if you look at that, there will be suggestions as to the direction the syllabus to take, in addition to which the committee that is called up to look at revisions of the syllabus, that they would have suggestions of their own. But one of the problems is that you can't, the syllabus cannot really address details of each territory, seeing the span of territories, and new territories are coming on board all the time. So you want to have people who are able to relate the general themes in history to the specifics of their own particular countries.
Hello, any other comments or questions from any of our attendees? If not, I can ask Dr. Pemberton to comment on another observation in one of the school reports. It says that these themes are presenting challenges, Dr. Pemberton. Economic diversification, 1875 to 1958. Any particular reason why a topic like that will be presenting challenges to the candidates?
Yeah, well, the question of economic diversification is one of the areas that is particularly challenging to many students. Part of it is because I don't think it is adequately covered in their preparation. And there is a lot of guesswork that goes into those responses. So that they talk about, when you come to talk about non-agricultural, so if it's anything with the sugar industry, the candidates seem to be a bit more comfortable with that. But when it comes to talking about the petroleum industry, to talk about Guyana and Jamaica's experience with respect to the aluminum, you don't get competent responses generally. And that is where the problem lies. And then, as I said at the start, when you say economic, it really does not mean anything to some people. They write generally on the developmental period. So that becomes problematic. Let me talk for me now.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Any other questions or comments? Otherwise, I would continue with my notes. Dr. Pemberton, another area where it seems to be presenting a lot of challenges. You mentioned its social and economic conditions in the 20th century, but I'm surprised to see that the United States and the Caribbean, 1776 to 1985, is also an area that presents challenges.
Yes, because, that is the thing. Once you put social or economic or anything like that in front of the question, the candidates become, for some reason, uncomfortable, and their responses really do not address the question. Now, when you talk about social conditions in the 20th century, in the 1900s, I will admit that the textbooks do not provide a lot of detailed information. For example, you will have the book saying, well, health conditions were bad and the people lived in poor quality housing, and you may get in some text a description of the houses, and you will say that the books will say that there were health problems and there were water problems. Some areas didn't have a public water supply. So generally you get about the lack of a public water supply, the lack of infrastructure in the country, and the quality of the housing. But apart from that, everything else is very general. And so you don't get, okay, the people suffered as a result of the water problems, people suffered from waterborne diseases because they were drinking polluted water. That kind of breakdown is not always evident in many of the responses. So while there is a general general sense. It is not enough to give them, for them to earn a 1 in the subject, although they just have a general sense. So they might get a 3, and if the writing is not particularly good, they might end up with even a 4. Right? So I think therein lies the problem. And then
So,
the U.S., sorry, yes, you go ahead.
so in the day and age of the information superhighway, aren't there resources online that is available that can fill this gap?
There are online resources, but students have to be taught how to select online resources. Because if you go to a site which is open access and anybody could put anything in there, you do get many instances of inaccurate information. So at St. Augustine, there's a course which teaches candidates how to make a selection of sites and what to look for. But if you take a site where, and they normally tell you that, please add something, this was updated last time, and it is open and anybody could push information in there, they have to be careful.
Okay, understood. All right, attendees, we are awaiting your comments and questions for Dr. Pemberton. Otherwise, I would mention one more theme, Dr. Pemberton, that is presenting problems according to the report, and that is movement towards independence. Can you discuss what is the shortfall here?
Well, it's a very strange thing. Caribbean people are very politically oriented. But somehow in the schools, both students and teachers do not like political development. So you do not get, I can't understand the development myself, but I have encountered it in my classes at the St. Augustine campus. Students just do not like politics unless it is about one individual. So if you have an outstanding politician, yes, they come comfortable to write about him. But the political development of the Caribbean, and if you talk about unification of the Windward and Leeward Islands, goodness gracious, you will be surprised what you would get. They're turned off, and I don't think they pay sufficient attention because the information on those areas are present in the text. Now, the syllabus is what guides the questions on the paper. So if a particular syllabus objective is selected for a particular year, then the question comes on that. So if the question is on unification, early unification, and when you talk about unification, and if you just make the mistake to put the word federation in there, what you get is the Federation of 1958. So you put the Leeward Islands Federation, you put the Windward Islands Federation, and you get in the Federation, the West Indies Federation, 1958. So that is the problem, that they cannot discriminate, and they do not have much information of attempts at federation outside of the Federation of the West Indies. And let me tell you about the Federation of the West Indies. You get in one strong point all the time. Jamaica caused the problem. End of story. Whatever you ask about federation, they are sure to put that in. So I think it is for us who teach to get students to understand that the whole process of understanding your history, everybody is a social, economic, and political animal all in one human package.
All right, we have, Dr. Pemberton, we have a question from Jessica Fernandez. She says, with regards to the resources, are there online outlines available that could be made available to students about each topic or the theme? Could a relevant and reliable web page be provided?
Well, that's really a question for CSEC to answer, whether they could provide that service. I mean, other than CSEC or some central body, I don't see how else that would be done, So it's quite possible CXC could do that.
Okay, Jessica, I hope your question was answered, that this is something that's possible. And I'm sure as well, I don't know how many of the teachers online have heard of notesmaster.com. And on the Notesmaster site, there is a Virtual Teachers Association. So there's a History Teachers Association. So I would encourage the teachers as well to become part of the Virtual History Association for CSEC Caribbean History. And you can also share resources, because I'm sure there are some teachers in the region who have found good reliable resources that they use in their classes, and maybe you can share with other teachers who maybe need these resources as well.
Yes, I want to agree with you that sharing the resources, I think, is the way forward. And I know that there are some history teachers associations existing in some territories, and if there are more of them, information can easily be passed from one group to the other.
Right. Pemberton, one of the things that I, from my own standpoint, have a perspective on, and you can comment on it. Sometimes when I listen to some students across the region talk about subjects such as history, I think for some reason they take these subjects for granted, and they think that, oh, that's a subject I could just study for before the exam and do well. I mean, are students taking history, for example, for granted?
Yes, I think we have a problem. One, a number of the candidates who actually write CXC are there by force. They need some subjects to fill up their timetable, and because of the other areas they have chosen, they are shunted into a history class. And the little love notes that we get and the exam tell us exactly that. And some students say they didn't want to do the subject at all. And so that is one part of the problem. Secondly, what you said, yes, there is an assumption that history is easy, and that assumption doesn't only come from the candidates. In the wider public, everybody could be a historian and could write history stuff. So that the perception of what the subject is also part of the problem, because some people think that you just learn off a few things and you go and write it back. But I mean, the teaching of history has moved way, way beyond that in current times, and the CXC syllabus certainly does not go or encourage people to go in that route. And also, the teaching of the subject, again, it is assumed that anybody could teach it, and in some schools, if they have a position, the principal might look and say, well, I need a teacher in sociology, or I need somebody in economics. But that person could teach history too. So instead of hiring a history teacher, you hire economists or sociologists, and you put them to teach history. And their approach is not really what would serve the best interests of the student preparing for the CSEC exam. Because this exam assumes that you understand the historical process. And if you don't understand the historical process, you will assume that you can write a general response and earn marks. But in reality, that does not happen. So what we want is for the candidates to understand that a decision was taken here. The Europeans came and they settled here, and they decided to plant a crop that required extensive clearing. So you have the environmental impact, you have the social impact, you have the population impact, and make those kinds of connections. And so that is what generally we find missing in many of the responses. So that they know the Europeans came, and they know the Europeans enslaved indigenous people and brought captive Africans and enslaved them too. But connections as to what impact this had on the society. So the land distribution and the access to resources and those kinds of connections are what are required by the students or of the students.
So generally what you're saying, we're not connecting the dots in the education system.
Yes, well, the connection is possible in some places, but I'm saying if in the school one that the teacher allocated to the subject is not a historian, you could have some problems. And this is somebody who has been out of touch with history, and they come in there and they are given a timetable where they are forced to teach a subject. Usually they do not complete the syllabus. They go where their interests are, where they think they are comfortable, and the whole approach is affected. So I don't have all these little notes that the candidates write, but when the candidates bear their heart in the exam, when they think, those little sympathy notes will earn them some marks, so they say the teacher didn't do this, and the teacher didn't do that, and they never knew this, and they knew that, and we got a teacher who was not interested in this subject. You get all of those little signals from candidates in the exam. Yeah, they write that on the exam. So we have to look at the whole process. And if a teacher is given a timetable and forced to teach it, well, the teacher could do nothing if he or she has not really studied history or have done only 1 or 2 courses and can't handle the subject. I mean, for their own survival, they need to be paid, they will work. But they will not be able to function in the way that will assist the students to get the kind of grades that they would like to get.
So some of the issues with performance of Caribbean history are structural. They're not just a matter of students not being studying.
Yeah. Oh, no, they are structural, yes. They are not just student related. There's a larger, I mean, sometimes it's the timetable, they don't have enough time to do the subject. I mean, one school, they were given 2 periods per week to complete that. In 2 years, with two periods a week, that is just inadequate. And if you count in the public holidays, just throw people's schedule off. I mean, no wonder that you can't complete the syllabus.
Right. So as I said earlier, I was a little surprised that the United States and the Caribbean is one of the themes that is causing challenges. This has been a theme in the history syllabus when I was in school 20-something years ago. And I'm really at a loss as to why this would still be causing so much challenges to students in 2015 and 2014.
Yes, it is, and you know, it is a very popular area of study. And the questions are very popular. The questions in the U.S. and the Caribbean are popular, but they want to write specific things about the U.S. and the Caribbean. So if you ask something about the impact of the U.S. and Caribbean culture, they're comfortable, very comfortable with that. Those questions are usually very well answered, so they're groomed to answer, you know, or they groom themselves to answer that kind of question. But if you rephrase the question and ask, you know, a different dimension of the U.S. and the Caribbean, if you talk about trade and so on, you're not going to get strong responses. So in the years that you might have looked at, the question might have turned away from cultural influences. And if you ask about specific cultural influences, or when they like to talk about the music and so on, and World War II and the impact of the bases on the territories, they like to talk about that. Right. Very familiar with those aspects of the U.S. and the Caribbean. But anything else outside of the cultural, it presents something of a challenge. And that is because that's what they learn.
Right. What about issues or topics such as the slave trade or the Amerindians who were here before us and so on? How are those dealt with?
The section A, the section on the indigenous people, is always well done. Always. They are quite familiar with the indigenous groups and their practices, their social and religious practices, how they organize their societies, and the difference between the Kalinagos and the Tainos. We still get people who talk about the cannibals who the Kalinagos or Island Caribs, whichever name they choose to use. But by and large, the section A is generally the best answered section on the script. So they are very familiar with that. The trade, the trade and captive Africans also, they are very good at and certainly display strong knowledge of the Middle Passage, the process of acquiring captives in Africa, and how they are handled once they reach the Caribbean. In the Caribbean, they're familiar with the social ordering of different groups in the society. What is not so well done is that within these groups, so you know you have whites at the top, browns in the middle, and blacks at the base. But within these groups, there will some wrongs. So among the whites, you have the big planters, and then below them you have the smaller planters, or in the case of some groups like the Portuguese, the lesser whites, who are not really considered white. And then you have the browns, and within them you have the wealthy colored people, and you have the poor ones, and some of the colors are enslaved, but by their color, they have a better social status. So when you come in within the enslaved group, color and role in the society, whether you're a skilled person or you're a driver, which gave you some authority. So those distinctions within the major groups are sometimes overlooked by the students.
So what I hear you saying, Dr. Pemberton, is the detail seem to be missing.
Details are missing, and I think class time factor is significant here with respect to those missing details.
So that brings me...
Sorry, you
go ahead. No, you go ahead, Dr. Pemberton.
I was saying also the notion that once you have the general stuff, that would get you the marks, but you will get some marks, but you will not get maximum marks because you have not provided those critical little inside pieces that show that you understand the society. The society was not simply black, white, and brown. Within those groups, there are browns who did not like brown, there were blacks who did not like blacks, and there were whites who scorned some of their white kin. So that will give us a sense of the complication of the society.
Okay, I just like to advise our participants that it's now 8:39, so we have approximately 21 minutes to go. We'd also like to advise you that the hashtag for this evening's seminar is hashtag CSEC Carib History, CSEC Carib History, and you can tweet that and send it to your friends and let them know where we are here on the webinar. Right. Do we have any other questions or comments from our attendees? So far, we seem to have about 28 persons online.
But while we wait on them for questions, I just want to underscore the importance of an understanding of chronology. The response from a candidate about an event that happened in a time period that does not have any bearing on the time period of the question in front. So if you have a question that asks you about social developments in the Caribbean, 1900, you write about 1838. So you must respond. Also, if it's like immigration, you could ask to describe the immigration schemes, which everybody is comfortable with. But if you ask of what significance was immigration the latter years of the 1800s, so that is 1896, 1897, when there were increased requests for immigrants from the countries, the major countries in immigration schemes, Trinidad and Guyana. But you want to tap in on why was there this increased demand, but you will still get a description of the scheme from the time it started in the 1840s. And that is where a large number of people just deprive themselves of reading marks. So you go into the whole history of immigration when in fact you are asked to discuss what was its significance in the era towards the end of the century when there was heavy competition for beef, and the planters thought that what they would do is reduce their costs by bringing in more people so you could offer them less. There's more competition for labor, so they can't probably take what they get. And so that kind of selection of information suited to the time frame of your questioning is something that the students need to work on.
Very good point. And so that brings me to another point I want to ask you in terms of the keywords that are asked, that are used in the questions, and the one you mentioned there. We explain to our students and our listeners when you hear or you see the term discuss, what is the expectation of that question?
Discuss is never used on the CXC paper. We have that word is now banned. So if you're asked,
it's banned.
It is vague. I mean, at that age, the candidates don't see what discusses something for tertiary level. And they understand the pros and the cons, different sides of an argument. And it is said that for candidates that age group that we are targeting with CSEC, it will take them too long to work that out, and they would erode their time just trying to figure out the question. So we simplify. You ask to list something, you ask to explain something, you ask to give reasons for something, you ask to describe. Now, where the problem comes, you ask to list, that means 1, 2, 3, 4. And when you ask people to list, they go into a big, long discussion. But listing is only going to earn you about 4 marks maximum. So if it said list 3 or list 2, you write 1, 2, 3 full stop. And you put whatever the items you are listing, but you do not have to write paragraphs when you are listing. If you have to describe, and you look, again, the candidates must always look at the amount of marks allocated to a question, because the activities what determines the mark. So if it says list or to identify 2, then you write 1, 2. But if the mark is 8 marks or 9 marks or 12 marks, you have to give a proper explanation. You have to answer that in sentences. So you can't give a one-word answer for a question that will earn you, that could earn you 12 marks or 9 marks. If it's 9 marks, it's 3 marks for each point, and therefore you have. If it's 12 marks, it's 4 marks for each point, and the additional mark has to do with the extent of the development of the mark. So you look at that. So if it is for 2 marks, you do a one-word to do. You know, in what year did Columbus sail or something like that? What is the name of the ship? Fine, you put your one-word answers there. But when you come down to the later part of the question, give more substance.
Okay, I noticed that Felicia and my friend from Belize has a question. Why from Belize? Can you go ahead? Our participant from Belize, from Carazol Community College. Can you go ahead?
Hello.
Hello, yes.
Good night.
My question is concerning FBA research. I have had many instances where my students want to do a lot of local history, but I do not know what is the procedure. I have asked here in Belize when we do the workshops summer, and nobody really seems to give me an appropriate answer as to what is the procedure I should follow in order for my students to be able to do a question on local history. And how local can it be? Can it be like the history of a specific for people in Corozal, or does it have to be a national history? That is more or less what I wanted to know.
Oh yes, you are quite free to have your students take any aspect of your history of Brazil or of Belize, sorry, or of their district and use it for the SBA. Other than that, Belize is on the syllabus with respect to the way the process of enslavement differed in Belize because of its involvement in the wood industry, so the harvesting of the wood and the organization of labor for that trek into the forest to retrieve the desired wood and how it is sailed along the river. That is in the syllabus. That is in the body of the syllabus, but the SBA allows you to tap into any aspect of your local history. So the students will just go through the procedure, what they're writing about, give a reason for choosing the topic, and then the rest is, I mean, it's welcome that we get, this kind of information about the inner workings of some of the parts of countries that we don't really encounter on a day-to-day basis. So yes, your students can do their Caribbean study on the local history.
Okay, so I would not need to write necessarily to CSEC or do any type of other application or what's not for my students?
No, not for SBA. You have to follow the rest of the syllabus, but for the SBA, you and your students are absolutely free to take any topic that you want about anything about your area.
Okay, how about times I have had more than one here that they have asked, here in Corozal, for example, we do a lot that has to do with the secretization of religion itself with the Spanish along with the Maya groups here that is still existent in some of the villages, and it is practiced, up to this day. And we have had students say, Miss, I can do this, and I have not been able to approach if the question is appropriate enough because of the fact that it has to fit into the syllabus.
Well, I mean, it has to fit into the syllabus, but certainly the syllabus has room for the SBA. It is syncretism of religion in a locality. The Spanish influence is historical, and therefore it is absolutely acceptable.
Okay, excellent. That really takes off so much from my back.
You don't need to carry any stress. Local history, that's what the SBA is about.
Right, and just to advise my teacher friend from Belize and other teachers who may be listening, that this is really what the SBA is supposed to do. The SBA is supposed to be a meaningful piece of work that really sheds light on what is happening in your society, in your community. In fact, I think what CXC really looks for is for SBAs that can even solve problems in the community and highlight the things in your community. Sorry, Dr. Ferguson.
Yes, I would add to that one of the things with the modern perception of history is about problem solving and about social understanding. So we want history to be functional. So your students will be going out to their communities and understanding the issues that come up in their communities and be therefore in a position to help the resolution of some of the problems. And this is what history is about.
Okay. That was really my first perception about it, but I am quite young in this, so I was like, I'm talking to the other teachers in the institution, and they were more like, you have to stick to the syllabus and whatnot, and I go, but I thought that the whole point of doing this thing was for students to be able to still practice historical research and the process of historical research. So I say, to me, it shouldn't matter really about the question itself, and it's fit into the syllabus. But it's more for the students to be able to look at the process and be able to understand and appreciate the process of historical research, I believe.
There are few things that can't fit into the syllabus for the SBA, very few things. I mean, the syllabus is very broad, and it embraces virtually everything about everyone. So for the SBA, you can fit it in many places.
Thank you very much.
All right, my friend from Carzal, you live in a very beautiful part of the world.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, I absolutely love Belize. I've been to Carzal once. I absolutely love Belize. We have a comment from Felicita Reyes, and she asked, can CXC put out more sample SBA, especially the do's and don'ts? I want to direct you to our website, cxc.org. Under the manual section, there is a do's and don'ts manual for SBAs on the website. So you can please check out the website, www.cxc.org. And there, look under the examination section, and there's a manual for do's and don'ts of SBA. There's also a manual there for principles for SBA. So please use those resources that are available.
In addition, every year, the examining team makes a selection of best practice SBAs and worst practice SBAs. So we usually choose out samples of very good and very bad, and that is to emphasize the do's and don'ts. I don't know if CSC actually publishes those. I know that they are put in the reports that are sent out, so that these could be used as guides.
We do put exemplars on the website as well, Dr. Pemberton, from the different subjects.
Right, well, we do exemplars, yes.
Yeah. Do we have any other questions? We have about 7 more minutes. I have another quotation I want to take from the 2007 annual report, Dr. Pemberton. It says, although candidates possess some general knowledge of the questions, they needed in most cases to provide specific and detailed responses to pay greater attention to chronology. I think you were making that point earlier on.
Yes, yes. That is one of the problems, and that is most manufacturers where they tend to be very general. You get a sense that there's quite a lot of guesswork going on here, or as I said earlier, that you pick up something in a newspaper talking about some current problem and you write that into a response as if it were part of the historical experience. And so that is where I think if we emphasize more the historical method, but that would be contingent upon having sufficient time. Now, the other issue that is problematic for some of our candidates is the fact that in some schools, history is introduced in lower schools. And so there's a foundation in the approach to the subject. But in other schools, they don't do history until Form 4. So when they are in Form 4 and preparing for the CSEC examination, they actually have at the same time to establish the foundation as to acquire the breadth of knowledge that is required to answer the questions that will come in CSEC. And that is very challenging. So that is part of it. So then you will get them being easily oriented to giving generalized kinds of responses. So I think what is required, I feel that the CSEC syllabus, okay, CSC is committed to a two-year preparation, but in my view, I think it should be 3 years. And this would serve for those schools, students in those schools which have restrictive time frames and whose candidates are not introduced to history in the earlier years of secondary school.
Okay, folks, we have 4 minutes to go. This is your opportunity to ask any questions Right. So there's a question here. When will a study guide be published for Caribbean history? Has CXC been exploring that possibility? Dr. Pemberton, are you aware of any study guide for history coming out
There's
soon?
the study guide is in press as we speak. There were some problems with the history one. I think they changed the authors or the lead author several times over because of problems. Somebody was sick, somebody was not able. But I think there's a huge effort on the part of the publishers right now to have this thing out this year. But it is
All right. All right. Felicita, the study guides for CSEC history should be out this year. Please send to Belize. There is a bookstore in Belize that is the distributor for the publisher of the study guide. Nelson Thorns, they have a distributor in Belize. I'm sure they will send copies to Belize for sale as well.
I'm sure they will send them everywhere.
Yes, of course. Any other questions or comments from our attendees? Go ahead.
I would like to know, for example, here in Belize, we have our workshops every summer, but usually the people that host these workshops, and most of the time cannot give us concrete answers as to some of the questions that we may have. So I would like to know when CXC may be able to send official CXC personnel to be able to, I would say somewhat, even train us. Because, for example, I started to teach history from the experiences of my previous teachers and so on. And yes, there was training, you know, I'm a graduate of UWI, but it is not like training on the actual CXC itself, knowledge base that it requires on, for example, the procedure for SBA and so on. That is what lends itself to a number of us maybe not doing what is so right for CXC.
Yes, I quite understand the problem. I don't know what CXC training program is. I don't know, but I recognize that some people do have problems. I myself went to a training in Tola a couple of years ago, and most of the people were brand new and didn't have an idea, didn't have resource material, and so I had assisted them in getting stuff together. So I suspect that this is something like that might be what we need, but then CXC is the one who, I don't know who organized your training program, if it was organized by your government or if it was organized by CXC, but if it is CXC, well then you're in the right, you're making your knocks in the right order.
Yes, because that is one of the things that I gather has been, you know, every time I attend workshops, there's just so many of us that are quite new in the system, and then we have so many things to question, and then at the end, it is home with the same amount of questions, you know, nobody has really answered much of it. So, you know, and most of the time it is the same advice, you know, look at the stuff in Notes Master, use the resources here, there. I guess some might even be worse than me, you know, that they might have the resources and not be able to maybe even use it well because of not knowing some of the things that I think CXC is expecting as procedure. So I believe that it is something that CSEC should do, because I mean, you know, we're looking at students being qualified for this, and it is I feel bad, you know, for not being able to give them maybe everything that they should be able to know by the time that they the CSEC exam.
Right. So what I would suggest to you, and CXC is open to this, you write your Ministry of Education and suggest to them that CXC send a history resource to Belize and the work for the new teachers delivering syllabus. And this is something that CXC does from time to time, and I'm sure CXC will be willing to consider that request.
Okay, thank you so much.
No problem.
All right. Do we have any other questions or comments? It's now 9 o'clock. If we do not have any other questions or comments, I will just ask Dr. Pemberton to give her closing remarks and then we'll wrap up. If you're finished speaking, please mute your microphone.
Right. Yeah, are you ready for me?
Yes.
Okay. So what I would say is really restate what I said at the start. Candidates must read instructions carefully, read questions carefully. When they are doing the multiple choice questions, do not guess the answer. Do not select your answer based on any particular shading pattern. That you must read the question and look for the best response in the multiple choice. We do get a lot of guesswork and things that we assume that everybody knows, and they probably do know it, but they just shade out the wrong thing. Take your time, read the question properly, and also make sure your responses, you have a response in each section. You cannot, if you do 2 questions in any one section, you are depriving yourself of the 25 marks for one question because you can't get anything for it. So I want you to remember that. I want you to respect terms like social or economic. And if it's about economic, the question asks you to give economic development, stick to economics and don't throw social and political in there for good measure because you're not going to earn yourself any marks that way. But if you take your time and if you give a reasoned response and you look at the mark allocated to each question and let that guide you the amount of time you spend on each response, remember, do not rewrite the question. You don't have to do that. The markers have a question sheet in front of them, so you don't need to tell them again what the question is. But I think for the most part, the exam is doable. You all can do very well on the exam as it is set. It reflects the syllabus. It reflects things you were supposed to have been doing. Some things you do know better than others. But if you give a reasoned response to even those that you don't know so very well, you can still earn yourself a fair amount of marks. So I wish everybody good luck on this exercise. And I want you to remember that the exercise was formulated with you in mind. So the idea was to have something that you all can manage. Good luck again. Good night.
All right, Dr. Pemberton.
Yes.
I know you just give your wrap up, but do you have 2 more minutes? We have a couple more questions.
Fine.
But, okay. Just give me 1 minute. Let me get them pulled up for you.
Good night.
Yes, go ahead. No, go ahead. Please go ahead with your question. You said good night. Okay, Dr. Pemberton, can you hear me?
I'm hearing you.
Right. Question. My students often complain that the history syllabus has too many themes. Can CSEC reduce or restructure the themes?
Well, as I said, there's a process for reviewing the papers and syllabus content. The themes and the topics in the exam cannot be reviewed annually. Of course, it's not going to be practical. Themes are broad, and you are not examining all the themes all the time, but you are required to have understanding of the connectivity of the different themes. And so I think if you are trying to learn off all the themes, you will have problems. But if you have a system where you're showing connections between things, so that, for example, you say enslaved people did not have many rights, and that they were provided for with houses and food and clothes allocations by plantation owners. But at the same time, you recognize that enslaved people had provision grounds. They were allowed to sell their items on the market. So although they were enslaved, they were able to earn money and acquire possessions. That varied. You did have enslaved people who bought and other enslaved people. You did have enslaved people who managed to save up and purchase their freedom. So this is the connection you're making. There is an enslaved status and they are the property of other people, but they themselves have managed to acquire property. So it's a logical process of thought that is applicable here rather than a whole body of information that you are trying to learn of. So what it requires is that you direct the reading of your students along particular lines, and I think you can embrace these whiteboard themes within the time frame that you have in your class, for your classes.
Okay, next question. I have noticed that on the theme U.S. in the Caribbean, the questions seem to cover large periodization compared to themes in section A and B. Is there any specific reason for this observation?
Well, the themes that are selected are based on the objectives. So if the theme, I don't have the syllabus right before me at this point in time, but if you are looking at a theme, again, like the U.S. influence on culture, that would be a broader spread because you can't narrow that down to a particular 5-year or 10-year period. So that would be spread over a longer period of time. So a lot depends on what particular theme is. There are some events that are confined to a specific time frame, so you can get a sense of its development over that restricted time frame, and there are others that are spread over a longer period, and the questions have to embrace that, because if you try to narrow it down, the candidates will have problems responding.
Okay. Why was the option of doing 3 assignments instead of the research paper removed from the SDA? Do you know anything about that?
Why was there?
The option of doing 3 assignments instead of the research paper removed from the SDA.
Well, that was a very heavily debated issue, whether 3 assignments was equal to the SDA. There were concerns about the research skills, which 3 assignments do not necessarily develop. The idea was that the students doing an SBA would be introduced to the research method. That is, that you have a reason for, you have a topic, and you have a reason for selecting the topic which you would state, and then you check the material by referring to a number of texts which you list, and that process is what is basic to a research exercise, which is an essential part of history. So the thought is that if you do 3 essays, you are just doing the same thing that you have to do in exam, but you want the SPA to target another body of skills.
Hello. Come. All right, one more question. Should the teacher teach all 9 themes or just 3 of the core topics? I think the answer to that is no.
The answer is absolutely no, because the 9 themes are there for you to understand the historical process. And when you select themes, if those don't come in the exam, then your students are at C2, and those students, if they get by, they would never understand the whole process of historical evolution, which is what we want, to identify problems, where they occurred, when they occurred, and hopefully to be able to formulate solutions. And that is what we want in the people. So selecting 3 themes will help us along that process.
Right. One person is asking about the appropriate text, Caribbean History Book 1 and 2, and so on. And we'd like to know about other resources that they can use.
Well, for teachers, there are several texts available which will give you information that you require that you can transmit to your classes. Now, my guiding line for the selection of texts are those which reflect some of the new approaches. For example, one of the problems we have is the continuation of a perception that resistance by enslaved people could be classified as active and passive. And that was written into some of the older textbooks. And we have been saying, no, a resistance is a calculated method. You decide which method or methods, and many of them use several, would work for you. You could be confrontational and lead a revolt or burn down an estate. You could be, you could run away and escape. You could stay in the system and work within the system as some people do. But that is not passive. That is clear strategy. You have to do that and not draw it to the attention of the plantation owner that you are in fact resisting. And that was a strategy of many enslaved people to hide the fact that they were resisting. So the woman would sing and sing their song and sing about them right in front of their faces, and they don't realize that they are being derided. So so that guides me. If I see a book that marks passive and active resistance, I just close it immediately. So, but you want a text, and the newer text, hopefully, will move into the new approaches in history, and that is what we want. We want to get them with the proper terminology. We've moved away from slaves, and we talk about enslaved. We've moved away from, we don't entertain passive and active resistance anymore at all. And we've moved from talking about East Indians. That is a mistake of the European people. They come from India, they are Indians. So you look for texts that move you in that kind of direction into the sort of new history, the new uses of history, the new approaches to history. And some of the texts, like the Beckles and Shepherd, those two texts by Beckles and Shepherd have a good body of information for you that the teachers could use to pass on to students at the CSEC level. And some of the older texts, you really have to ask some questions about them. So I think if you are with Beckles and Shepherd and some of the CXC, volume 1, volume 2, volume 3, I think you should be okay.
Okay, thank you for that. When listing, do you use point form for CXC? I think this question in relation to when you said that when it talks about list, you just need to put 1, 2, 3. So one of the use point form.
Not point. If the thing says list three places where something occurred. So you name New York, Port of Spain, Kingston, and that's your 3 places. Right. So you listing, so you do not have to write a long paragraph. So a list is just that, 1, 2, 3.
Okay. That seemed like all of the questions we had pending. So once again, I want to thank you very much, Dr. Pemberton, and all of the participants who participated tonight. And just to let you know again that the audio of this webinar will be placed on our social media, our Facebook, our website, as well as on our YouTube channel. So for those of you who want to share it with your friends, you can go to those sites sometime tomorrow. And the link to the webinar will be there so you can share with your teachers, with your fellow students. I also want to thank Ayadeli Pompey, our webmaster, who has the capability to set this up and ensure that it runs smoothly. And to you, Dr. Pemberton, once more for your willingness to facilitate this very informative session tonight. Thank you, everyone, and have a very good night and good wishes on the exam later this month.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Good night.
Okay, good night.